It all feels like a dream now, a movie I watched about someone else's life. For 22 years, my world was a four-bedroom house on a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't just wood and plaster. It was a living, breathing thing, the keeper of all my memories. My father and I had planted the oak tree in the front yard when I was 6. I could still feel the rough bark under my small hands, the weight of the watering can he helped me hold. The faint scratch on the hardwood floor by the fireplace was from my first pair of roller skates. Every corner held a ghost, a happy one. After Dad passed away, that house became my sanctuary and my purpose. My mother, Eleanor, she wasn't the same after he was gone. A light went out in her eyes, and she seemed to shrink into herself. I was in my final year of university, studying to be a graphic designer, with a job offer waiting for me in the city. But how could I leave her? The thought was impossible. So I stayed. I unpacked the boxes I had just finished packing. I let the job offer expire. My life, the one I had planned, was placed gently in a drawer, and I closed it. My new life revolved around her. My routine was a quiet rhythm of care. I'd wake at sunrise, the same time she did, and have her tea ready, Earl Grey, 2 sugars, a splash of milk, just the way she liked it. I learned to tend her prize-winning roses, my hands, once covered in charcoal dust from sketching, now perpetually smudged with dirt. I cooked the meals my father used to make for her, trying to coax a flicker of the old joy back into her face. I managed the finances, paid the bills, and made sure the house, our fortress of memories, was immaculate. It wasn't a chore. It was an act of love, a daily pilgrimage to the woman who had given me everything. I sacrificed my youth, my career, my chance at a life of my own, and I did it gladly. I believed I was banking love, storing it up, building a foundation of devotion that could never be shaken. I thought our bond was the one unbreakable thing in a fragile world. Then, Richard entered the picture. He was a retired financial advisor she met at a community garden club. He was charming, with a silver tongue and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. I disliked him instantly. He felt like an intruder, a foreign element in the sacred space my father had left behind. But he made my mother laugh. Slowly, a little bit of that old light returned to her eyes, and for that I tried. I set an extra place at the dinner table. I listened to his boring stories about stock portfolios. I endured his patronizing pats on my shoulder and his comments about how it was high time I started a life of my own. He was planting a seed, and I was too blind with love to see how deep the roots were growing. The day it all shattered was my mother's 65th birthday. I had been planning it for months. The theme was a garden party, a tribute to her love of roses. I spent a week baking her favorite cake, a multi-layered lemon and elderflower confection from my grandmother's recipe book. The house was filled with friends and neighbors, people who had watched me grow up. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. My mother was radiant. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, and Richard was glued to her side, playing the part of the gracious host. I felt a pang of something ugly, jealousy, maybe, but I pushed it down. This was her day. I was just finishing setting the cake on its pedestal when the doorbell rang. I figured it was a late guest. I opened the door to a man in a crisp, gray suit, holding a leather briefcase. He didn't smile. He asked for Eleanor. I let him into the garden, where the party had paused, conversations lulling as all eyes turned to the stranger. Richard stepped forward, a practiced, somber look on his face. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Davies," he said. My mother stood beside him, her hand in his, looking not at the lawyer, but at the ground. Mr. Davies opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. His voice was cold, devoid of any emotion, as he announced he was here to serve an official notice. He began to read. The words were a foreign language at first, legalese, formal and sharp. But then certain phrases cut through the haze. Notice of eviction, 30 days to vacate the premises, legal transfer of ownership. I looked around at the faces of our neighbors, their smiles frozen into masks of confusion and shock. My heart started pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I thought it was a mistake, a horrible, cruel joke. Then the lawyer said the final killing words. He looked directly at me. The property was sold this morning. The eviction notice has been filed at the request of the new owner and co-signed by the former owner, your mother, Eleanor Vance. He handed the papers to me. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely hold them. And there it was at the bottom of the page, her signature. The familiar, elegant loop of her, the same signature from every birthday card, every permission slip, every note of love she had ever written me. It was dated that very morning, the morning of her birthday. The morning she had smiled at me over breakfast as I put the finishing touches on her party. The betrayal was so absolute, so meticulously planned. It stole the air from my lungs. The garden fell silent. The only sound was the buzzing of a bee near a rosebush. I looked at my mother, pleading with my eyes for an explanation. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at her shoes, her face a blank wall. It was Richard who spoke. "It's for the best," he said softly, as if he were talking about the weather. "Eleanor and I are moving to a retirement community in Florida. This old house is too much for her. It's time for a new start. A new start. My home. My life. My sacrifice. Erased." At that moment, my floor disappeared. It was the deepest pain I had ever felt. If you have ever been through a great disappointment and understand what it is to have your heart broken, please like this video so I know I am not alone on this journey. The 30 days that followed were a blur of numb disbelief and frantic activity. I packed 22 years of my life into cardboard boxes, each one a coffin for a memory. The sound of the packing tape gun was like a gunshot in the silent house. My mother and Richard had already left for Florida, leaving me to dismantle our life alone. She left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "I'm sorry it had to be this way. It's for your own good. It's time you grew up." With the note was a check for $5,000. Conscience money. I tore it into 100 tiny pieces and let them fall into the trash like confetti at a funeral. I couldn't touch it. It felt like blood money, a payment for my soul. The day I closed the door for the last time, I didn't look back. I couldn't. The oak tree I planted with my father seemed to droop its branches in sorrow. Or maybe that was just the rain on my eyelashes. I found a tiny, one-room apartment on the other side of town, in a gray building that smelled of damp concrete and boiled cabbage. My world had shrunk from a sprawling house of memories to a single room with a mattress on the floor and boxes stacked to the ceiling. The darkness that followed was profound. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. For weeks, I barely left the apartment. I'd just sit on the floor, surrounded by my boxed-up life, and cry. The silence was the worst part. It was a roaring, deafening emptiness that the thin walls of the apartment couldn't hold back. I got a job waiting tables at a greasy spoon diner, working double shifts just to make rent. My hands, which had once tended roses and sketched charcoal portraits, were now raw from hot water and cleaning chemicals. I moved through my days like a ghost, serving coffee and toast to strangers, my mind a million miles away, replaying that moment in the garden over and over. I was at the bottom of a well, and I had forgotten what the sun felt like. I was convinced my life was over. The person I was, the devoted daughter, the caretaker, the keeper of the flame, was dead. One rainy Tuesday, my landlord threatened to evict me again if I didn't clear the last of the boxes from the hallway where they'd been stacked. I had no energy, no will, but the fear of being homeless again was a sharp enough poker to get me moving. I started unpacking, not to put things away, but just to consolidate, to throw things out. I was numb, just going through the motions. Then my fingers brushed against worn, dark wood. I pulled it out from under a pile of old linens. It was a small, hand-carved recipe box. My grandmother's. I thought it had been lost in the move, or worse, thrown away. I ran my thumb over the faded, carved roses on the lid. The clasp was stiff, but it creaked open. The scent that wafted out was a ghost of my childhood, cinnamon, vanilla, and the faint, papery smell of old love. Inside were dozens of handwritten recipe cards. My grandmother's beautiful, looping script filled each one. But they were more than just recipes. On the back of a card for Irish soda bread, she had written, "For your father, on the day he lost his first tooth." On a card for apple crumble, a note, "Eleanor's favorite. Makes her smile even on a cloudy day." It was a history of our family, told through food. It was a chronicle of love. I sifted through them, my fingers tracing her words, and then I found it. A card, slightly yellowed, with the title Sunrise Lemon Cake. It was the cake. The birthday cake. The recipe I had followed so meticulously. My first instinct was to slam the box shut, to banish the memory. but I forced myself to read it. At the bottom of the card, in my grandmother's hand, was a final note. This cake is for celebrating new beginnings. It is a reminder that even after the darkest night, the sun will always rise again. You just have to be patient enough to see the dawn. A tear dripped onto the card, smudging the ink. It was just a sentence, just a few words on an old piece of paper, but it was the first pinprick of light I had seen in months. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a plan. It was just a small, fragile spark in the overwhelming darkness. The idea that a sunrise was still possible, even for me. That was the moment something shifted. I wasn't saved, not yet. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. I felt a whisper of hope. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words on the recipe card echoed in my mind. The sun will always rise again. The next morning, instead of pulling the covers over my head, I got up. I went to the small, sad kitchen in my apartment and cleaned it from top to bottom. Then I took the last $60 I had in the world and went to the grocery store. I bought flour, sugar, lemons, butter, eggs. The best ingredients I could find. I came back and laid everything out on the tiny counter. I opened my grandmother's recipe box and found the card for her simple, no-fail sourdough bread. I spent the entire day in that kitchen. For the first time in months, my mind was quiet. There was no room for grief or anger. There was only the feel of the dough under my hands, the precise measurements, the patient waiting for the yeast to work its magic. The smell of baking bread filled my sad little apartment, chasing away the scent of damp and despair. It smelled like home. It smelled like hope. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to keep doing this, to hold on to this feeling. I started baking every day. I gave a loaf of bread to my gruff, elderly neighbor. He grunted, but the next day he left a small bag of tomatoes from his window box outside my door. I brought a batch of oatmeal cookies to the diner. My boss, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, ate 3 of them without saying a word, then quietly told me I could take home any leftover food I wanted at the end of my shifts. These small acts of connection, of sharing something I had made, were like watering a tiny, forgotten seed inside me. I decided to take a leap. I used my meager savings to rent a stall at the local weekend farmers market. My setup was pathetic. A wobbly card table, a tablecloth I'd found at a thrift store, and a handful of loaves of bread and a few sunrise lemon cakes, sliced. I was terrified. The other vendors had professional signs and beautiful displays. I had my grandmother's recipes and a desperate prayer. The first few hours were brutal. People walked by, barely glancing at my humble table. I felt that old, familiar shame creeping back in. Just as I was about to pack up, a woman paused. She looked about my mother's age, with kind, tired eyes. She pointed to the lemon cake. "What's that?" she asked. "It's a sunrise lemon cake," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "My grandmother's recipe." She bought a slice. I watched her walk away, my heart sinking. 20 minutes later, she was back. There were tears in her eyes. "I don't know how you did it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. It tastes exactly like my mother's cake. She passed away 10 years ago. I haven't tasted this since I was a little girl." She bought the rest of the cake. That was my first victory. It wasn't about the $20 she paid me. It was about her face. It was about the connection. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just selling baked goods. I was selling memories. I was selling comfort. I was giving people a little piece of what I had lost, and in doing so, I was finding it again for myself. That one customer changed everything. The next week, she brought 2 of her friends. Word started to spread. People didn't call me by my name, they called me the memory baker. They would come to my stall not just to buy, but to talk. They'd tell me about their grandmother's kitchens, about the holiday traditions they missed. They would give me their own tattered family recipe cards, asking if I could recreate a lost taste of their childhood. And I would. Each weekend, my stall got a little bigger, my offerings more varied. I was working harder than I ever had in my life. I'd finish my shift at the diner at midnight, go home, and bake until 4 in the morning, catch a few hours of sleep, and then head to the market. It was exhausting, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the ache of building something, not the weariness of falling apart. Soon, I was making more money from my rickety table than I was at the diner. The day I walked in, and gave Sal my 2 weeks' notice was a turning point. He just nodded, and for the first time, he smiled at me. "It's about time," he said. "Your bread is too good for this place." My reputation grew. I started a simple website, and orders began pouring in for birthdays, anniversaries, even funerals. I was becoming a part of the community's fabric, weaving my own story into theirs, one cake, one loaf, one memory at a time. It was there, with my own hands, that I began to rewrite my story. I stopped being the victim and became the author of my destiny. If my journey of overcoming is inspiring you, subscribe to the channel to follow the next chapters and be part of this community of new beginnings. 2 years passed. 2 years of flour on my clothes and butter under my fingernails. My little market stall had grown into a small, charming bakery on a bustling corner of downtown. I called it the Sunrise Bakery. The walls were a warm yellow, and the air was always thick with the scent of cinnamon and melting chocolate. It was my haven, built not of wood and plaster, but of resilience and second chances. I had a small but loyal staff and a line out the door most mornings. My life was full. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life I had earned. It was mine. Then one Tuesday afternoon, the bell above the door chimed, and I looked up from the batch of dough I was kneading. Standing there, looking frail and lost amidst the warmth and laughter of my shop, was my mother. I hadn't seen or spoken to her since she'd left the note on the counter. She was thinner, and the lines around her eyes were deeper. She looked old. The expensive clothes and jewelry were gone, replaced by a simple, worn-out coat. Richard was not with her. For a moment, the world stopped. The smell of the bread, the chatter of the customers, it all faded away. It was just me and her, a ghost from a past I had worked so hard to bury. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the front, my heart a steady, slow drum. Not the frantic beat of fear, but the calm rhythm of a heart that knew its own strength. "Hello, Mother," I said. My voice was even, betraying none of the turmoil inside. She looked around the bakery, at the happy customers, at the shelves laden with beautiful creations. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of awe and something else, regret. "You've done well," she whispered. "I saw an article about you in a magazine." So that's how she'd found me. Not by looking for her daughter, but by stumbling upon a success story. I didn't offer her a seat. I didn't rush to comfort her. I just waited. Finally, the story came tumbling out. Richard had been a con man. The retirement community in Florida, the new start, it was all a lie. He had convinced her to sell the house and put the money in a high-yield investment account that was actually just his own pocket. Once the money was gone, so was he. He had left her with nothing. She was living in a small, rented room, working part-time as a cashier. She had come back, she said, because she had nowhere else to go. She was waiting for me to break, to cry, to yell, to maybe even offer her a place to stay. The old me, the daughter who had sacrificed everything for her, would have. But I was not that person anymore. I looked at her, at this woman who had broken me in the most public and cruel way imaginable, and I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel pity. I felt a strange kind of peace. "I'm sorry to hear that happened to you," I said, and I meant it. "But my home is no longer yours to claim. You sold it." Her face crumpled. "But I'm your mother," she cried. "I have nothing." The words hung in the air between us. "I had nothing, too," I replied, my voice soft but firm. "I had nothing but a box of my grandmother's recipes and a broken heart. You put me out on the street, Mother. On your birthday. You taught me that I had to rely on myself, because the one person I thought I could always count on signed my world away on a legal document. And, you know what? It was a terrible lesson. But I learned it. I built this," I said, gesturing around the bakery, "with my own 2 hands. I built it from the ashes you left me in. I have forgiven you, not for you, but for me. I had to, so I could move on. But forgiveness and trust are 2 very different things." I went behind the counter, took a warm loaf of sourdough bread, and put it in a bag. I walked back and handed it to her. "No one should go hungry," I said. "But you cannot stay here. This place, this life, it's mine. You are no longer welcome in it." She took the bag, her hand shaking. She looked at me one last time, searching my face for a crack in my resolve. She found none. She turned and walked out of the bell chiming her exit. I did not watch her go. My bakery is my legacy. It's more than just a business. It's a sanctuary for anyone who needs a little warmth, a little comfort, a reminder of a time when love felt simple. I found a new family in my customers, in my staff, in the community that embraced me when I had nothing. The peace I have now is not born from a perfect, unscarred life. It's the deep, settled peace that comes from knowing you can face the absolute worst and not only survive, but build something beautiful from the wreckage. My father's oak tree still stands in front of that house, but my roots are no longer there. They are here, in this place of my own making. Today, I understand that the wounds of the past do not define who we are, but what we do with them does. I am immensely grateful that you have listened to my story this far. If it has touched you, share it with someone who needs a light, and leave a comment with a word of strength and hope. Together, we are stronger.